And I'm not sure which year this is, but welcome to the latest edition of the International Coaching Clinic. I'm going to introduce John Hammond, who is kind of taken over running this thing and bringing in the talent for it. But I first want to acknowledge two legendary coaches here that have come today. First, the great Lenny Wilkins, if you could give him a hand. Championship coach, and he was the 18-year president of the Coaches Association, and just an iconic guy, you know, in our world. So it's great to have him here. The other gentleman is the recipient of this year's Tex Winter Lifetime Impact Award for assistant coaching, and that is Dick Helm, who was with Lenny for many years. It's great to see so many of you out here. This is a great opportunity to learn. With that, I'll introduce John Hammond, the general manager of the Orlando Magic, to get it kicked off. Thanks for being here.
Great to see everybody out this morning. You know, when we walk into a gym as coaches or people in the front office, to evaluate players, you can see the good ones, and you can see them pretty quickly, right? They stand out. Not hard to pick those guys. And I think the same thing happens from a coaching standpoint, that when you walk into a gym and you see a coach work, you can see right away, that's a good one. He's got it. I had a chance to work with Sweeney in Milwaukee just a few years ago. He's moved on to Detroit and now in Dallas, but I worked with him with Jason Kidd in Milwaukee. I used to watch Sean on the floor, and Sean had this ability, and only a few coaches I think really can do this, that I would watch Sean stop the action, and he would identify each player and say, you know, think about this point, this point, this point. He could see the whole floor. I can tell you that as a coach, I never had that ability. I wish I had that ability, but Sean is one of those guys that has that it factor. You can see right away, he's a good one, he's a special one. But I know I think he's one of the top assistant coaches in this league, and no further ado, Sean.
Thanks, John. My talk today is going to be on special situations, and what I'm going to try to do is give you guys some different thoughts on, close like this. Better? No tongue? So my talk today is going to be on special situations, and what my hope is to give you guys some different thoughts on how to attack these things, how to develop some philosophy. A lot of coaches in here already have it. So just as much as anything, give you guys some different thoughts as to how to approach it. The first thing to me, when we talk about a special situation, is we've got to define it. And in my opinion, it's any situation that is irregular and typically includes a time and score component. And when it's irregular and there's time and score, there's more factors that come into your decision making. Some examples are low clock situations, side out of bounds, corner out of bounds, baseline out of bounds. Some end of quarter, you know, we get into as that clock is winding down, what do we like? What's the offense or the defense? What's the best way to attack that? End of game is obviously, you know, in the NBA, we see over and over and over again. And then, you know, jump balls, which we see a fair amount, whether it's an offensive or defensive tip. And then lastly, just another example would be changing defenses, whether a team's going zone or they're running a combination defense, you know, triangle and two, box and one. So those are just a few examples there of end of game special situations that we can see. Talk about the time and score component, and this would be a good example from the playoffs here recently. You see the differential in the shot and game clock, 3-point game, whether or not Utah wants to play it out or take the foul. And then the other piece with that is you see the timeout situation there. So here, Utah elects to play it out. Memphis is going to run this down. The Jazz end up getting a stop, but you can see the decision-making that goes into something like this, making sure we know the time and score component and understanding what we have to do as we develop a philosophy. When we're thinking about our philosophy in these situations, because they are so unique and require more detail, the better we have to be in terms of making them systemized. If you talk to coaches in the NFL, where their game is so very situational, oftentimes the way they'll study it is they will take time, score, down, and distance and try to get as many of those plays in a row and just go through them one by one by one to figure out philosophically what makes the most sense. And over the course of the last couple years, during the pandemic here, tried to do something similar myself. First one here to talk about is end of quarter situation, so trying to close the quarter efficiently. So some things that come up are 2 for 1. When do we want to take that shot? Is it at 33 on the clock, 32? Is there a better time to take it for you and your team in the fourth quarter when it gets down to the end of game and you want to go 2 for 1? Typically you can take it a little bit later because of the way that shot clock and game clock will play out, especially if you're down and you're going to have to foul if you miss. Then the next question you got to ask yourself offensively is, what shots do we want? Are you as a coach okay with one of your players coming down and taking the dribble up 3? If you think back to like Toronto with Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet, oftentimes their best 2 for 1 play was to dribble down and jack a 3 with 33 seconds left on the clock. Defensively, knowing that going into it, what that guy wants to do, making sure we're back and set and loaded to the basketball potentially. So understanding what shots are you okay with in those situations, whether it's an analytical game or if it's a shot that's open and ready, a good shot for you, making sure that we understand that. When it gets to the last shot situation, when do you as a coach want your team to go? If they have a foul to give, start it a few seconds earlier. So instead of going at 8 on the clock, we may go at 10 on the clock, knowing that they're going to take a foul. And then defensively, if you are going to take a foul, if you have one to give, oftentimes you do that between 7 and 5 seconds on the clock. But one thought I would offer is when you get to that 2 for 1 type situation, you have a foul to give. In studying it here over the last couple years, it may make more sense to take it on the second to last possession. So for example, if the Atlanta Hawks are coming down and we're on defense and we have a foul to give and we know they want to take their shot at 33 on the clock, we'll take our foul at 35. And now they got to take it side out and decide, do they want to try to get that 2 for 1, or are they going to use the 14 seconds allotted and try to get a better shot conceding the 2 for 1? So something to think about there for you guys when you get in those situations. And then end of quarter here, last shot situation. Offensively, a couple things to think about is number one, when do we want to go? We see it here. Dallas is going right at about 7 on the clock, and they're going to try to attack the matchup, forcing a switch. Interesting here, Atlanta does a good job of, as that clock winds down, going to trap and forcing a mid-range pull-up, but at the same time offensively knowing, one, what do we want to do? What's our philosophy in terms of, are we attacking a matchup or running a specific set, some kind of action that we don't typically go to? And then if we do attack a matchup, making sure that our spacing is correct, knowing who we are as players, communicating that with our guys so that they can execute and handle those situations well. Another situation to think about is after free throw, example we talked about earlier. And this to me is a great time to have a mini timeout. When you think about football and a huddle, this is a similar type situation. As a coach, you can call your player over and you can make sure that your guys are organized, communicate, and then can attack with some purpose. Another thing you can do in this situation is look to get a player a touch. So as we're looking to attack after a free throw, we want to make sure that we, again, like we talked about, are organized, we communicate, and then we attack. Sorry, let me get this straight. Okay. So here the Lakers, for example, with Anthony Davis, trying to make sure that he gets a touch after a free throw. You see here, putting him all the way down in the front court looking to attack. Two things that does: one, it gets him the ball, but the second thing it does is it takes one of the bigger players for the Clippers and forces him to go down to the other end, making the offensive rebound harder. So good example here of trying to run a play to get a guy a touch, similar to you would in an ATO situation. And then another example here of a good after free throw action is this would be just a little pistol action with the 5. But if we are organized, we can get into our offense quicker, run these quick hitters with great pace, and make sure we're organized. And then one other thought at the after free throw situation: if you do have a great bust out big or a great coast-to-coast guard, if he can get that rebound, it's a great time to attack before that defense is set. Low clock situations where the ball's out of bounds. Very typically an inefficient situation. Hard to get a good look. The defense is set. You have a limited amount of time. But one thing as a coach that you can do is you can look to use that 5 seconds to get a little bit more misdirection, a little bit more creativity, and give yourselves a couple of options when you do try to inbound that ball. So you can take time without taking time off the clock. Example here, baseline out of bounds, 2 on the clock. Philly does a good job here of trying to run multiple screening actions to get a shooter a good look. And although this shot doesn't go in, you can see what they're trying to do here in this situation. Movement into a back pick, trying to get a big guy going to the rim, and then coming off of a pin in. And the one thing that I like about this play that's interesting is Mike Scott, as he starts to go to the rim, you can see him here curling back to go screen on the backside for a hammer. So just some misdirection you can use there. Corner out of bounds, unusual situation, pretty typical play here, but trying to make sure a couple things. One, we execute and we do it with pace. 2, making sure we have an ability to get a catch in this situation if a team does try to go to a denial. And then again, you see quick hitting misdirection here. Another example of a corner out of bounds action, trying to make sure, again, can we get a catch? In this situation, Utah uses Gobert and his size to get the ball inbounded and then gets into a quick hitting action. And one thing you see here, especially as teams go into potentially denying a little bit more in these situations, that quick action, you can put pressure on the rim and get a good look. Jump ball situation. When I think about jump balls, most of the time what I'm thinking about is where is it? Is it in the center circle? Is it in front of our goal or their goal? Do we have a high likelihood of winning the tap or not? If we're likely to win it, that can change potentially how we want to do things and our philosophy. And then after that, making sure that we either match up and block out, or if we have a chance to steal the jump ball, steal it. Oftentimes in these situations, teams play it pretty casually, and this is a great time as you drill it and address it with your team, whether it be in a walkthrough or just, in practice, you can emphasize the aggression you want to play here. And although this doesn't show anything in terms of aggressiveness, you can see situationally here, the clock is down, there's only 5 on the clock. Miami is unlikely to win this jump ball, so from their standpoint, they've got to make sure that in this situation, Milwaukee can't tip it to Holiday here and get off to the races. And Milwaukee's situation here, making sure that they're matched up and have their biggest player at the goal if they were to lose the tap. Nothing eventful comes here, but you can see the thought process behind it. Second point on this is offensively, knowing what you want to do when you get into those low clock situations. If there's more on the clock and you have time to get into a quick pick and roll, doing that. Otherwise, you've got to tap it and either look to get a quick shot or a quick drive at the rim to score or make one more pass. But you see 5 on the clock, not a lot of time to run something there. So we've got to tap it, get it, and go. Zone offense. Some things to think about when you're going against teams changing their defense. Number one, when do they play zone? As you're studying that team, going into the game, knowing when they like to go to zone. Is it after a timeout? Is it after a free throw? Is it when they're trying to change momentum later in the game? Do they have something that they like to go to potentially if they're up 3, zoning around the three-point line? So knowing when that team wants to go into their zone, why they want to do it, and then also understanding what their slides are in the zone. From there, trying to figure out your offense. Do we like a set play versus a zone? Do we want to get our best player in the middle of the floor and pass him the ball, trying to get that zone to either collapse or expand before we do so? Do we have an action that we like where we can overload them? So trying to figure out what it is. And then if it's after a timeout and we call a play or we draw up a play, are we able to run that play versus zone and man if we know a team likes to go to zone? And then the one other point I would say, and this kind of goes back to referencing their zone slides, is there an action that you can run that will turn their zone into a man-to-man? So for example, an angle pick and roll with the 5, oftentimes we see teams that will just turn them into a 1-5 pick and roll defensive situation for them, or going to horns. Or if we pass that ball to the elbow, do they go to man, switching every screen? So having some ideas there in terms of what will turn their zone into a man-to-man. You see here, Houston a couple years ago when Harden and Chris Paul were still there, you would see a lot of box and one or different combination defenses against Harden, especially after timeouts. So when we recognize that, making sure that we can get organized, get our spacing correct, and then look to attack whatever that defense may be quickly. Another example here, we see the floppy action, and Indiana's going to go into running floppy with both cutters going to the strong side, creating an overload. So good execution here of screening and then knowing who to screen as the second cutter comes out. So as we see DeRozan going to take the ball, Sabonis here screening his own man or screening the 5, creating the open shot for the shooter going to the corner. So knowing what we like to run there. And then if we do have a zone play that we really like, are there different options when we run it? Can we get to different things? So here you see Toronto going to a step up, and on the weak side, you see them trying to screen in these weak side defenders for a shooter on the back side. So good example there of a zone play. And then as that shooter is taken away, what do we go to next? If the shooter isn't taken away, same thing. How do we execute it here? You see the same exact play, screen in on the back side, an excellent job of the ball handler knowing what the defense is doing and what his reads are. Same play, a little bit different situation here. The ball gets middle. They look to attack to the shooter on the screen in, and then we see a rotation occur. And the shooter in this case knows the rotation is coming, makes one more pass, and we see X5 can't get out to the corner fast enough. So in our zone offense, making sure that we are able to attack appropriately given what that defense is doing. End of game. And this is something that we see more than anything and we all spend a lot of time on. But trying to develop your philosophy as it comes to the end of the game. General thoughts, do we need a 2? Do we need a 3? And are we up? If we're in a foul situation, do we have time to trap beforehand? Is there a differential 4 or 7 seconds between the game and the shot clock? But understanding, those situations occur, and then how do we want to handle them? One thing, and I referenced it with the football guys earlier, but trying to stack as many of those situations as you can in order and think about what you would do and try to find commonalities, try to find things that are similar so that way we can develop our philosophy based on time, score, our timeout situation, fouls, some of those key critical factors as we get late into the game. So talked about looking at some of those plays and studying them from a video standpoint. The next thing to look at is what do the stats say? And this is an example of a statistical analysis, and we won't get into all the specifics here, but this is essentially a likelihood of winning based on certain situations studied over the last 20 years. So basically you have a score differential here starting at 15, getting down 15 to up 15, and it starts with 5 minutes left. And we studied this both historically, so what actually happened, and then also the model of what is the most likely thing to happen. And as a coach, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go with this, but it would help you in terms of your preparation, your feel. So for example, if we're down 7 with 2 minutes left, historically and on the analytical model, we have less than a 5% chance of winning. So what this can do for us is we can say, hey, we're gonna hit his ass when he comes over half court, or we gotta jack a few more threes here, or we gotta crash like banshees, because if we don't get an extra possession or we don't get quick baskets to turn this score, it's gonna be really hard for us to win this game. We can bleed it dry and keep it close, but the likelihood of us winning is depreciably lower as this time gets lower. So thinking about your philosophy, looking at some of those things, offensively at the end of the game, understanding do we want to play and look to attack, or do we want to take a timeout? If you've got a situation where you can keep a matchup that you like on the floor, or if a team has a defender, if they took a timeout, they would get off the court, may make more sense to look to attack. So having that feel as you get into those situations, obviously a great shot here from a kid we used to coach in Milwaukee, Chris Middleton, but having a feel for what it is, whether you want to take that timeout or you want to look to attack. And if you do like to take that timeout, when do you want to take it? Do you want to take it with 1 minute left in the game, or do you want to save it until you get to that 30-second area? And that's your feel and your study as a coach when you're looking to do that. Another thought here, Avery Johnson, my first boss in the NBA, would always look to attack X1 or X5, especially late game, because in his mind, and I'm assuming he learned this from the great coaches he worked for previous to him, those guys aren't used to switching, and oftentimes when you add shooting or you have a matchup problem, they don't want to switch. So here you see a good example of an action where we see a mid pick and roll, 1 and 5, into a 5-4 pin down, or 5-3, depending on what you want to call Simmons here. And then great job from Embiid of sealing, and an excellent job of Harris here making this pass. The one other point I'd like to make in this situation here is this is a tough switch angle, and it's a tough angle for Thompson to stunt, because there is no low man who's going to help him out. So interesting way of looking to attack it there. And then end of game, is there an action we like? Situationally here, Phoenix is down 6 with 1 minute and 20 left or thereabouts. They've got to go quick, so they look to get into a little pistol action here and bring their shooter off of a pin down to try to get him a quick look at a 3. And if you think about that stat, we talked about that model, percentage chance of winning here is low, so we got to look to get a 3 off. And then on the backside here, it makes a ton of sense for us to crash the glass, even if our rules typically would say we're going to get 4 back. Another action here for late in games, that weak side hammer action. So again, you see a little misdirection to get it in and playing to the backside on a hammer. Puts that defense in a tricky situation, puts X5 in a situation where he's got to potentially compromise his instincts and stay home. Talked about the rebounding component here, but here's a couple examples recently here where it makes a ton of sense to crash the boards. So you see here, 2-point game, and shot goes up. 18 on the clock, 5-second differential here between shot and game. We got to go to the boards. If we can get an offensive rebound here, we can put the defense in a scramble situation. Even though this is an excellent job of scrambling, that extra possession, as the number of possessions gets lower, become more and more important. Another example here, of a rebounding situation. You see Miami trying to go attack the rim, also have an option for a shooter on the backside, and now they're up against it. So we've got to make sure in a three-point game we do whatever we can if we miss to go get that offensive rebound and look to attack. Another situation here, I think this is one that I know we've drilled in Detroit and other places with our players. If we're in Milwaukee's situation and this is a three-point game late and we see that coach on the other side where he's going to try to take a timeout once they secure this basketball, if we are on the perimeter here, we've got to crash. Regardless of our shooter's likelihood to make it, we've got to make sure we crash, because if we get this rebound, essentially we can end this game. They don't even have a chance to take a three, get a quick two, foul game, whatever it may be. So if we can turn that into a two-possession game, that's critical. And another thing to think about, my boss in Detroit, Dwayne Casey, was big on, is do you have a free throw play when you're down? So you see here, 2-point game. Houston's at the line here, second of 2 free throws. Do we have a free throw play? Do we like to cross? Do we like to have a guy circle under, as Houston's going to do here? But do we have a free throw play so that when we have to miss on purpose, we can be in position to go get that offensive rebound? One other thing here, just in terms of end of game, is knowing the rules. When I was in Milwaukee and John was there, we had an assistant on our staff named Joe Prunty, who, as we worked on end of games, especially as it got to late clock situations, and he got credit after this game from Coach Monty Williams for talking about there is no goaltend in this situation. And Joe would make that point regularly so that our players knew it. And you see a great example here, even with that ball on the rim, and we know we've got to make a great screen, we've got to make a great pass, but as a player, you can understand both offensively and defensively, there is no goaltend in that situation. Another situation here, and this is from a defensive perspective, you see the time and the score here, not enough time, and that ball is inbounded and caught for us to foul. And we know it's long odds as it is, but when that ball is in the air, we can foul and not be penalized, giving the other team a free throw. So you see here, Milwaukee's going to try to inbound the ball to Lopez with the size mismatch. So when that ball's in the air, you take that foul. Even though they're celebrating, they got to come back and shoot free throws. So understanding what those rules are late in the game. When we talk about need 2 and need 3 situations, as a general rule, like to break those up into how much time do we have or how many passes do we have. So a need 2 situation with 1 pass. And we know offensively and defensively, we've got to understand the play, communicate what we've got to do, and then defensively know what our coverages are, making sure we know our assignments. If we're switching, make sure we do it talk and touch, body up in those situations. And then offensively here, if we're late clock, half a second, similar to that out-of-bounds play we just saw, knowing if they're going to switch or not. So in this case, Minnesota is going to switch. So Sacramento does a good job of getting behind the switch. Andrew Wiggins there makes a hell of an athletic play. But are there certain things that we can run to take advantage of a switching defense? Another example here. 5, pinning down on 1, putting the smallest defender right there. So that way, if a switch does occur, we can look to seal that player and make a pass over the top. And then the ball handler there, making sure we do a good job, looking them off, knowing what our reads are. Great time to fake a pass before we make a pass and put it on target. 2-pass situation here. You see Miami trying to use a lot of the court, going to the backside, and they're looking to see if they can get a quick look at a 3 up at the top of the floor here, and if not, now get into an isolation with their best player in an area that he likes to operate, going to his dominant hand. Defensively here, one point to make is knowing who can help. So if we're up 2 like Milwaukee is here, Lopez is the only guy who can help because his guy is the only guy inside the 3-point line. You see shooter, shooter, shooter. We've got to make sure we have discipline and we don't walk in allowing a team to get a shot that beats us. Worst case scenario, we can take a timeout or go to overtime. And then here, similar situation defensively. You see Atlanta did a great job in the playoffs all year of taking advantage of matchups, looking to attack defenders who were bad. So trying to take advantage of that late in the game here with a lead, and Philly does a good job of recognizing it and goes and hits. So they trap the ball handler. Now we've got to make sure our spacing is correct offensively, giving that guy 3 outlets, and then defensively knowing when that pass goes out, we've got to deny that ball back and then be ready to rotate correctly. Another situation defensively here. If we're going to switch, we want to make sure that we do a great job of bodying up, talking and touching on all our switches, making sure we're as physical as we possibly can, so that way we take away gaps to the rim. Similar type action here as we saw with that play that Sacramento ran against Minnesota, trying to create a switch and an attack behind the switch. One thing here that's a little bit different in that play is you see a defender down here on the backside who's aware of what's taking place. So defensively, making sure we switch, hold, grab, and then take away their opportunities to get a shot at the rim. Need 3 situations. The 2 things from my standpoint that you have to think about before anything else is who can make the pass and who can make the shot. If we've got multiple guys who can make a shot, that helps. But you see an example here, who can make the pass, who can make the shot. Utah 2 years ago, multiple game winners from Bogdanovich, obviously a hard-ass shot there, but similar situation here. Same guy inbounding, same guy shooting. So who can make the pass, who can make the shot? Simple action there, quick hitting, but making sure that we know our personnel. If we as coaches can answer the questions, who am I, who is my teammate, who's covering me and who's covering my teammate, and convey that to our players, we're probably going to be in pretty good shape offensively. Need 3 situation, late clock, we've only got 1.8 on the clock, and the defense knows there's only so much space that we as an offense can use. So how do we maximize our usage of that space? One way of doing that is get our shooter running across the floor, either towards the ball or away from the ball, starting higher up on the floor, whatever it may be to try to maximize our use of the space that we can, because we know we have to get a 3 off. And in this case here, a good example from Washington, Bradley Beal in this case, right there at the top of your screen, is going to come off of the screen, and even versus the switch here, because of the amount of space he uses, it's hard for a guy like Taj Gibson to put his body on him that far out on the floor and then stay with him as he runs to the open area. So our use of time and space in this situation is critical. Another question we got to ask ourselves is, does our play work versus zone if we know a team likes to zone across this three-point line, like Boston did in the past and Atlanta's doing here? So making sure that regardless of what we do, we have the ability to go against man or zone. Here we get a foul drawn, making sure that we use, again, as much space as we can. In a situation where we've got time to make 2 passes and a team isn't switching, offensively it becomes an ass-kicking contest. Our screens have to be physical, they have to be dirty. We've got to make sure we hit bodies to get our guys open. And then offensively as a passer, we got to make sure we do a great job of delivering that ball, as Reggie Jackson does here, on time, on target. So a multiple screening action play there. And then another example, again, need 3 situation. We have time to make multiple passes, and on the back side here, get a great look. But you see before that look, the screener in this case here, Dwight Howard, does an excellent job of making sure that that defender doesn't get to the player coming off of the hammer in the corner there. Another good example of an action, a little misdirection here. We know San Antonio loves to run a lot of hammer plays on the backside, but here's a little counter to that hammer play. Reject versus the pick and roll. Bring the shooter back behind the basketball. And you see here on the backside, the defender, as he turns his head to look at that drive, gets caught, and the screening action there, great timing, great execution. So need threes with time, you have a little bit of an opportunity to use some misdirection, do some different things there. And then the one piece to understand there is, are they going to foul or not? Defensively, if we're going to switch, and you see here the time on the clock, minimal time, under 3 seconds. This situation in the 1,000+ games that are played in the NBA each year with less than 3 seconds is only going to happen about 20 times a year. So offensively and defensively, it's irregular, but if you're not ready for it, it'll get you beat. Defensively here, the Lakers executing switches, trying to make sure that they do a great job of talking and touching here. Pete, what do I got to do here? Thank you. Switch execution here, like I was talking about, making sure that we do a good job of communicating, talking and touching, and then knowing who the shooter is. In this case, you see Golden State running a multiple screening action play, trying to confuse the switching defense, but LA does a great job in this play-in game here of taking away the shooter and eventually winning the game on the play. Talked about the foul situation. You see Phoenix is up 3 with about 7 seconds left, making sure we do a good job. If we are playing a team that's trying to inbound that ball quick and they know we're going to foul, we've got to be alert to our foul philosophy. If the guy's back is to the basket, if he's inside the three-point line, if that ball is in the air or a downward dribble is taking place, we want to make sure that we know as a team and our players can execute when we want to take that foul. So Phoenix here does an excellent job of executing that foul while the ball's in the air. So those are just some situations there defensively when you're needing a 3 or needing a 2, or you're trying to stop a team from getting a 3 or getting a 2. And the last situation here is a foul situation. So if we're down in this case and we're guarding a team that's trying to inbound the ball, some critical factors that we need to know is, number one, like we talked about, what are the rules and when can we foul? From there, do we have time to trap or go for a jump ball first? And for the most part, I look at the differential in time being, if it's over 7 or 4 seconds, can kind of dictate between the two. And then the last piece there is, do we have timeouts? So if we don't have a timeout, we are going to have to probably foul quicker as opposed to trying to trap or go for a jump ball and then take the foul, because we can't advance it. And then the last factor there is trying to know who their foul shooters are, who the best foul shooters are, who the worst foul shooters are, so that way we can do a good job of trying to take away the good shooters, force it to a bad shooter if we do have to take a foul. So those are just some thoughts for you guys in terms of special situations. I know there's a ton of different examples, ton of different ways that the game can get down to a very situational element, but those are some right there, and I hope you guys can take that and do something with it that will help your team. So thank you guys.
Any questions before we move forward? Any questions real quickly if you have anything?
Questions? Anybody with questions? Coach, thank you first of all for this great information sharing with us. I have one question about switching situation, need to. Yep. You showed an example that after the switch you teach the players grab and hold. Yep. I just wonder what kind of defensive position you want from the player. Switch, so grab and hold, stay high side, stay between the ball and the player, or stay low side, stay between the basket and the player. I saw that you give that flexibility to stay more high, and then if any low pass is coming to the rim, corner player is ready.
Yep.
But any situation, corner player is pulling up all the way, that lob would be available. So I just wonder the teaching fundamental about the footwork.
Yep. Need to situation, what we would tell our players is we want to start on the low side and we want to send every cutter towards the ball. So for example, if the ball is side out right there, we all want to be on the low side and send them toward the ball. And the reason behind that is so it doesn't confuse us when we're switching. If we all start on the same side, there's a better chance for us to make sure that we come together on all our switches. If you watched our summer league team last night, we lost in double overtime, sudden death, but the play that sent it to overtime, we didn't come together on the switch. And then the other thing we would talk about is regardless of if we come together, you've got to honor the call. So man guarding screener, you want to make sure that you body him up so that way we do come together on that switch. But if a call is made, just like in a pick and roll, we've got to honor that call. Good. All right, thank you guys. Thank you.
Our next speaker is a special friend of mine who I've gotten to know very well over the last 10 or 15 years. She's got a pretty amazing story. She graduated from University of Virginia in 1997 with every intention of going to medical school and becoming a researcher like the rest of her family. There was a tryout in Cleveland with the Cleveland Rockers with the WNBA. It was the first year of the WNBA. So she decided to show up for that. There were 450 players there competing for two spots. There was one for a perimeter player and one for a big player. And so it went from 450 to 200 to 150 to whatever. And she ended up making the team as a defensive stopper and a hard-playing, in-your-face, kick-ass wing player. So she did that for 1 year, got injured, and then her coaching career began. She went with the Washington Mystics for a year as an assistant, where she met and worked with Wes Unseld Jr., who was an assistant there also. Did that for a year, went to the Miami Soul for 3 years with Ron Rothstein and learned an awful lot from Ronnie about NBA basketball. Ronnie was, the coaches at that time in the WNBA that were ahead of the curve were NBA people that had NBA experience, knew NBA philosophies, situations, and things like that. That team folded after 3 years, and then she got hired in Seattle by Ann Donovan, who got the job, and the mandate was, hey, look, I need somebody that knows the NBA. Mike Tebow was dominating the WNBA at the time because he was a guy that had great knowledge of the NBA as well. And so Ann hired Jenny to do a lot of the X and O stuff and to bring that sort of knowledge. They won the WNBA championship in 2004. Then she became the head coach of the Sacramento team for 2.5 years until that franchise folded. You heard a lot of that franchise folded. The W's had some challenges that way, but it's produced some really great basketball people. Then she went to Seattle as associate head coach, won another championship, then became the head coach during a rebuild, and ended up with the Sacramento Kings 4 years ago, joining Dave Yeager's staff as a player development coach. I was with Jenny in a game we were there playing them in February of that year, and she said, hey, I need to talk to you about something. And I said, what's up? She goes, well, I'm pregnant. And I said, that's great. Who's the lucky? Well, no, I got a donor, and it's kind of a long story. If you ever want to read about it, it's on, Zach Lowe did a story about her 3 years ago. And it's an amazing story of a single mom who had two dreams. One was to be a mom, the other was to be an NBA coach. And so she worked with Sacramento. She got through that year, gave birth in July of 18, okay, to her daughter Riley. During that period, we had, Mark Cuban and I got together and came up with a role with Dallas that would allow her to be a coach, but also be a mom. It was a creative role where, you know, she would only travel on the one-game trips. And so, you know, for the last 4 years, she's been able to live the dream of being both a mom and an NBA coach. She's now with our staff in Indiana, and she's going to talk about something today that, you know, we all need to know more about. She's done a lot of studying about it from her head coaching days in the WNBA, and that is today's generation, Generation Z is what it's called. I mean, the millennial thing is like way in the rearview mirror now. Now it's Gen Z. How do they think? You know, how do you communicate with them? What are the ways to put them in environments and situations where they can thrive? And so I've heard her speak on this many times. I've learned an awful lot from her. Please welcome Jenny Busick.
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here with you guys. I get asked all the time my favorite thing about coaching in the NBA, and I think by far it's being around the best minds in the world and the hungriest minds. Like every coaches meeting, going back to when I used to go to Nate's coaches meetings in Seattle back in 2003 and 4 and 5, every coaches meeting is a think tank of bright minds, hungry minds, and the fact that you're here today is just more evidence of that. And I know this room is full of people that know X's and O's at the highest level. This was awesome, Sean. I learned some things, really was helpful. Appreciate that. I'm gonna go a little bit different route than X's and O's and talk about some of the methods that people are finding are most effective with this generation, because this generation is unique, Generation Z, and CEOs and leaders all around the world are struggling and frustrated with this generation. We know that the best leaders, the most effective leaders that have ever walked the face of the earth, one of their main attributes is empathy. It's not the most talked about attribute of great leaders, but it is, in fact, maybe the most important attribute of great leaders. So the more we understand those that we're influencing, those that we're leading, the more empathy we can have for them, and the better we can lead them, which at the end of the day is what we're after. We can know X's and O's at the highest level, but if we can't communicate it, can't connect, can't translate it, you know, it doesn't really matter. So my hope today is that we can throw around some things. It can get your guys' wheels churning, give you guys some food for thought, give you guys some food for conversation amongst your staffs, and we can be more effective in our teaching. So 24 and under is technically the Generation Z, but anytime you're dealing with generational things, there's a little bit of a gray in terms of the line. This generation of like 25, 24 and under is unique in that most generational trends go something like this or like this. And this one, we're seeing these huge spikes and these huge drops in trends such as mental health. There's spikes in this generation in anxiety, depression, suicides, drops in confidence, self-awareness, communication skills, social skills, emotional IQ, and they're drastic. A lot, like I said, very unique in the precipice and the rise of these trends. And so it's caused researchers to look at this generation particularly carefully and say, why are we having these huge changes all of a sudden? And what they're agreeing on now is that it's the exposure to not just digital, because this is a really obviously digital generation, but so are the millennials. It's the social media part of the digital nature of this generation that is making them struggle and making them unique. They are, from the day they're born, exposed to a world where you present yourself through a filter. And they become very calculated in what's going to get them the most followers and the most likes. And they're living with this mindset. And that's challenging their mental health, because now they're addicted to feedback, but really needing positive feedback. A nickname for this generation has become the snowflake generation. Because while they can put on facades of great confidence and they know how to filter their self-image, it's actually a very fragile generation. One of the reasons they're fragile is because they feel very connected, through the digital connections, but they're actually really disconnected in terms of authentic relationships. And authentic relationships are where we get our self-awareness, our true sense of identity. And then from there, the more we know who we actually are, who we were born to be, the more confidence, like authentic confidence we have as human beings. And this generation's not getting that. I mean, think about what you see in your locker rooms. Like, the locker room used to be the place where you learned about yourself. You were told about yourself. You told each other about each other. And it was real talk. You learned about people's backgrounds from all over the world. You learned what was different, what was unique, how people ticked. You knew how to communicate. Again, but you also learned about yourself. If you were going out there and jacking bad shots, somebody's going to tell you about it. You knew what you were good at, what you weren't good at. We used to play pickup all the time. And pickup, now looking back, was so valuable, because you show up at a playground, we all did it, and first of all, you gotta look the part. For me, blonde hair, blue eyes, female, I'm the only one that looked like me. I had to walk a certain way, dress a certain way to even get a look. Then I had to shoot a certain way, move a certain way to get chosen for a team. I was probably gonna be on the last team, and I better be sure I knew what I brought to the table, what my value was, what I could actually do, what I couldn't do, and only do that. How could I add value to the team? Because the only thing that mattered in pickup was to win and stay on the court so you didn't have to sit. So think about all the things you learned from that. Self-awareness, what your role is, what you're good at, what you're not. If you're not good at it, you're gonna go work on it. You learn leadership skills. When you're playing pickup, the other team has a great shooter, you figure it out. Yo, we gotta switch those screens. We can't go under on him. You're always thinking the game, problem solving, you're communicating. You can't be sensitive. This generation doesn't play pickup, has a jacked up youth sports system, and now you add this social media stuff, and we got some challenges in dealing with them. Think about when I was in college, had a rough day at practice. Maybe I got into a fist fight with one of my teammates, which did happen a few times. What would I do after that happened? Conflict with coach, conflict with teammate. Call one of my buddies. Yo, you got a minute? All right, let's meet. No cell phones. We got to meet this time, this place. Show up, and then you vent. And you tell them what happened. This happened. I was feeling like this. Da, da, da. And then you have a mirror right there in front of you. You're looking at your friend. You're seeing their body language. You're seeing their response, verbal, nonverbal. And now you learn from that situation. You go drive home from your conversation with your buddy. You sit at the stoplight. You don't have a phone. So you're sitting there and you're reflecting on what happened. You're reflecting on what your friend said. You're reflecting on previous situations you've been through. And your brain is connecting all these things. And you're growing from the experience. You're reflecting. And now you come back better the next day. This generation, conflict with a coach, conflict with a player. Soon as they get in the locker room, get on social media, take the brain somewhere else. Don't deal with it. No reflection, no connection. this is the most disconnected generation ever. Not just from people, but from themselves, from reality. They're not getting that mirror that comes from face-to-face conversation that teaches you about yourself, the truth about yourself, okay? Some other things about this generation. Because of the digital native, the fact that they're the first generation of true digital natives, their attention spans are very low. They need concise and interactive teaching. They're used to the immediate gratification, as I mentioned. This one I think is interesting. They have an aversion to risk and failure. We all know the greatest athletes we've ever coached and the greatest coaches are not afraid to make mistakes, not afraid to miss shots, not afraid to get fired. That's the best coaches, best players. This generation, because of the social media exposure, does not like to make mistakes, does not like to take risks, does not like to put themselves in situations where they might fail because they're fragile inside. We just got to know what we're dealing with because we need to build up some of these things, okay? This generation, because of that, talked to Steven Silas, his 2 daughters, almost in college, have never been on a date, didn't want to get their driver's license. That's common on this generation, okay? This is the YouTube generation. So what does that mean? If they want to know how to do something, do they go to a Coach Wilkins and sit up under his feet and ask him questions and learn from the next generation, respect the next generation? What do? YouTube. If it's a girl, she's into cooking, she wants to learn how to cook something, she goes on YouTube. A guy, young boy, wants to learn how to fix something, they don't go to their dad or their uncle or somebody that they know that's good at fixing things, they go on YouTube. So that has created now a generation who does not value older generations. In fact, they think we're irrelevant and dumb because we can't do all this, that, and the other. So that natural generational flow is not there. And we need to understand that. That can be frustrating if you don't understand it. They care way more what their peers think than what their coaches think. Okay? They feel like older generations are irrelevant. This generation, because of their ability to get online and start a company, get some side hustle doing this, doing that, they all think a little bit like a mini CEO. Very independent thinkers, need to take ownership of things to really activate their heart. Okay? We need to understand that. They need to explore, they need to express themselves. This is how they've been raised. So gone are the days that we walk into a gym or a locker room and we can expect them to do what we say because we say so. No matter who you are, what your resume is, how many games you've won or championships, those days are gone. Okay? So what are the learning environments that we're finding that this generation is responding to and thriving to? What are some of the methods of teaching that the science and the research is showing that works? And some of these things are going to be no-brainers to you guys, but now we can connect the dots to this generation and see and reflect as a coach. Can I take some of these things that I now understand about these athletes and tweak my teaching methods just a little bit, or maybe we figured it out through trial and error, they're responding to this, and this is just confirmation, but I have found these teaching methods helpful. We implemented a lot of them in Seattle when I was there the last time, and Sue Bird still texts me like, yo, you Miyagi'd us, okay? And she's very aware of those unique teaching methods. But I had to start with teaching them to her as our leader, 5-time gold medalist. You know, if she didn't buy into it, the rest of the team wasn't going to buy into it, and she did. I'm going to go through an acronym just to keep us on track, and I want to leave room for questions or conversations because I know a lot of you guys are thinking about some of these things. You have sports psychologists helping you with these things, and I'd love for this to be interactive at the end if you guys have any suggestions or thoughts. But the acronym that I'm going to go through is MASTER. Okay, we're talking about methods of teaching that this generation thrives in. The M stands for a mentality of growth. Now this one we know. We all know this. That you need to create a growth mindset in your team. And it starts with us as coaches. If we're results oriented, we will be perpetuating that fear of failure in our team. Because as a leader, you teach what you know, but you impart who you are, whether you like it or not. So we, first of all, in a leadership position, have to make sure that we are sustaining, and it takes constant intentionality, our mentality, our growth mindset, and not getting hung up in results. My best coaching jobs, I'd already been fired. Fire me again. I'm not afraid of that. The best players we've coached, Luka Doncic, you all know, that kid don't care if he misses 10 shots or you jerk him out of the game or he loses every game winner. That fearlessness is what we need to keep reinforcing, but it's an extra challenge for this generation because of what I've just shared with you. So we have to be very intentional, regardless of how they act and what they show in their filtered persona, of helping these young athletes be good with making mistakes and taking risks and quote unquote failing. That's how we grow. A baby doesn't, we talk about babies, when do they learn to walk? And we say, oh, my baby learned to walk when he was 8 months. My baby learned to walk when he was 13 months. Well, they found that the babies that walk the earliest are not the ones that are going to be the best athletes or the most coordinated or the strongest. The babies that walk the youngest are the ones that don't care about falling. They have a personality trait where they're good with falling and falling and falling and falling. You know, an amoeba, the most basic form of life, the only time that it just is going to die no matter what is when you put it in perfect conditions, perfect temperature, perfect this, perfect that. That life form dies. This generation likes to be comfortable. Look at our player development nowadays. I don't know about you, but I've been interested since I've been in the NBA at what player development looks like. Pacifiers, comfort, feel-good workouts. My guy. I only want to work out with this guy. And the workouts feel good, they're pretty, this and that, but it's not really, when I'm watching it, like an environment of growth, of challenge, of discomfort. I heard Steve Nash say one time that the only time he was uncomfortable was when he was comfortable. Are our athletes of that mindset? You know, Tiger Woods was the best golfer in the world, and he changed his golf swing and went backwards. Why? Because he was good with being uncomfortable because he knew innately that's what was going to take him to the next level. So we know we got to have our athletes in that threshold of discomfort for them to grow individually and as a team, but we have to understand that that's hard for this generation, and we've got to reinforce this all the time. Celebrate mistakes unto growth and keep that consistent. Another thing here, the A, ask first. Give you an example. If everyone in this room, if you have a piece of paper, a computer, if everybody can answer this question, even if you're totally wrong, okay, what is the capital of Florida? You don't have to say it out loud, but write down on your paper the capital of Florida. Even if you don't know, you're wrong, take a guess. All right, next one. Write down the capital of Australia. Write something. Or have an answer in your head. Capital of Australia. All right, anybody know capital of Florida? Anybody have a guess? Very good. Tallahassee. Everybody don't have to answer that. Anybody know the capital of Australia? What? Marion? Canberra. Very good. All right, you guys are good. Okay, did anyone get that wrong? You don't have to answer that out loud. Okay, the fact that I asked you that question as opposed to just came in here and said, the capital of Florida is Tallahassee, the capital of Australia is Canberra, you are like 10 20, 50, 100 times more likely to remember that. It softens your brain neurologically for now the information. Not only does it do that, okay, if I had asked for a show of hands, like, okay, who knows the capital of Australia? And you guys raised your hands, and you guessed, and you said Melbourne. And I say, no, try again. Sydney, no. What am I doing by doing that? I'm promoting an environment where you're okay risking and being wrong, and we celebrate that. So how can we incorporate that into our coaching, into our film sessions? All of this is breeding confidence, promoting risk-taking, being bold, being willing to make mistakes, but it's also an optimal learning environment in terms of method of teaching. We can use it in film, we can use it in our drill work. Give them a problem to solve together. So instead of saying, all right, we're gonna see, this team is gonna show real hard on a pick and rolls. And so we wanna look, when they show, we wanna look to slip, okay, move the ball over or back and in and beat it that way. Okay, that's a lot of how we teach. You know, we just come in and we tell them what we want, what we see. Instead of doing that, it may take a little longer up front, but if I said, okay, all right, guys, here we go, 3-on-3. Defense, I want you to hard show on every pick and roll. Offense, I want you to figure out how to beat that. If you need one timeout, use it, okay? But figure out how to beat the hard show or the switching. Let them try to figure it out. It may be a shit show. They may look terrible, never figure it out. But if you give them the opportunity first, you're promoting their social skills, their communication, their problem-solving skills, their confidence to try stuff and be wrong and make mistakes. And then when you come back and you teach how to counter switching on ball or off ball, it's gonna go in way deeper and it's gonna be a way more effective learning session. All right, next one, the S. Shut your mouth. This is the YouTube generation. They have low attention spans. They're independent thinkers. If we can be creative and in our drills, whether it be a skill or a team concept, we can have the feedback coming intrinsically, like from the drill or from the exercise. It's way more effective. So for example, you got an athlete who's shooting flat. Most of the time as a coach, we say, you need to get more arch on it, right? Shooting flat. Of course, that's what we would do as a coach. What's more effective, especially for this generation, is to say, why don't you see if you can hit 3 in a row, nothing but net? Get the difference? So now it's going to require them, because of the parameters, to shoot with more arch, but they've figured it out on their own, and it's much more likely to stick. But we can do that with everything. We can do that with everything. You know, you've worked on your defensive principles. You're an inside-out defense. Okay, so now we're going to play 4-on-4. The only way you get a point for a stop, it's a stops game. You stop, you stay. You got to get 3 stops to win. The only way you get a point on defense is if you get a stop and the ball never touches the paint. Okay, so now it's going to require them to be in their shrink spots, to close out properly, to knock down cutters, to communicate. All those things we've been teaching, but instead of just blabbing about those things, we've now created parameters within a drill where they've got to figure it out and problem solve it. And if they can't do it, you give them time to do it, then when you come back and you teach them some of the things that will help them be successful in that, they're going to be way more receptive, and it's going to be much more likely to stick. All right, the T. Test more than you teach. Test more than you teach. If I had 2 classrooms, and one classroom, we're learning the same information, but one classroom, I came in and I taught the information. The other classroom, I came in and taught the information. Now, day 2, over here, I taught it again. Day 3, taught it again. Day 4, taught it again. Day 5, all the way up to day 7. The other classroom, I come in, I teach it. Day 2, we test. Day 3, we test. Day 4, 5, 6, we test. Day 7, we test. Day 7, we test. This group is going to blow this group out of the water every time, not even close. And we do, a lot of times as coaches, we do a lot more teaching, and the only test they get is the game. And we do have a lot of games and not a lot of practice time, so I get that, especially these days. But conceptually, how can we use this concept of method of teaching in practice in our film sessions? How can we test them more than we teach? Again, you're also letting them be comfortable trying, taking ownership, making mistakes, figure things out. Try to create situations where they evaluate themselves and others. As I mentioned, this generation cares a lot more about what their peers think than what we think. So if you've got a natural generational split on your team, older players, younger players, try to incorporate your older players teaching your younger players. When you do film, instead of it always being a group, how about like task groups where you got like three guys with one older guy in each group, and you give them like an assignment. You know, I want you to look at these 3 clips, and I want you guys to figure out X, Y, and Z. At halftime, when I was with the Storm, I always told the ladies, coaches are gonna get together. You guys, before we get in, I want you to write on the board 2 things we've done well, 2 things we need to do better going in the second half. So now, instead of them coming into halftime, scrolling through social media, distracting their brain because they're pissed off about how much I played them or how many shots they did or didn't get, in their own little world, thinking about whatever, they're problem solving together, communicating. And I can't tell you how many times I came in and said, you guys nailed it, let's go. I didn't have to say anything. Incorporating all these principles into the halftime. The R, last one. Random versus block. This one I found particularly interesting and challenging. Random versus block. How many of y'all play baseball? I played baseball, but I was very young. I hardly remember it. Hitting a baseball is supposedly like one of the hardest skills in sports, especially the higher levels you go up. Okay, let's take that as an example of how we usually teach in classrooms in America in coaching. Okay, we're gonna work on hitting. We're gonna work 3 different pitches, 90 pitches. Here we go, we're gonna go 30 fastballs. Ready? Bang, 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 bang. By the end of the 30, got better. Nice. All right, now we're gonna do 30 curveballs. Here we go. Curveball, curveball, da-da-da-da-da. By the end of the 30, got better, everybody feels good. Now we're going to 30 knuckleballs. Here we go. Da-da-da-da. Da-da-da. End of the 30. Got better. Great practice. Coach feels good. Player feels good. Okay, now I take another group of athletes and I say, we've got 3 pitches. I'm going to scramble them. So here we go. Random. Fastball. Fastball. Knuckleball. Curveball. Knuckleball. The ball's spraying all over the place. Athletes banging the bat. Coach is like, what a waste of time. If we trained our athletes those 2 ways over time, when we get to the game, the one that has had the random training will blow this one out of the water by 1,000,000. We usually, as coaches, block train because it's clean, it's organized, it's neat, it feels good. It feels like we had a great practice. And then we wonder why, when we get in the game, they can't make a decision. You know, they took the best hitters in baseball, and they thought, okay, I'm pretty sure they were speculating, like, these guys probably have the quickest response time, you know, like quickest reflexes. So they tested their reflexes, and they were like average in the Major League Baseball. But they were the best hitters by far. So then they took those hitters, and they put them with a fast pitch softball pitcher who pitches completely different. They couldn't hit it. Why? Because what they learned about those athletes was not their response time making them such a good hitter. It was that they had the ability, they had picked up visual cues to read what pitch was coming before the guy even delivered it. So when I talked to Luca sometimes, I'd ask him what he was looking at. What was he looking at when he was in the pick and roll? What were his visual cues? Decision making, which we complain about a lot as a coach, and has gone way down since the days of pickup, and 1-on-1 and 2-on-2 and all these pretty player development workouts have come into the picture. Decision making has gone way down. It's not necessarily an IQ thing. They're finding that vision is the key to decision making. And so we've got to learn how to train vision. They do this in other sports, soccer, hockey, they train vision. So how can we incorporate decision making and vision into our workouts? Well, one of the ways is this random versus block, because that's requiring them to make decisions and reads other than just the team situation. This was the biggest one I had to talk to Sue about, because Sue doesn't like to make mistakes. She gets a lot of this other stuff intellectually, but informing her and educating her on the fact that we were going to change our practice style to where it was going to feel like a shit show half the time, but we'd be better in the games, and why, and here's how it looks, and here's some examples, and blah, blah, blah. She bought in, team bought in, and that team has now won 2 championships, about to win their 3rd, because they make great decisions, and they've continued to train this way. So, that's pretty much my spiel here. I think with this generation, just understanding some ways that we can invest in their social skills, their confidence, put them in situations to build these things, knowing that they're a little bit deficient in some of these areas, I think can go a long way. I've got some examples of some other drills, but I know you guys are bright enough to probably take some of these concepts and to incorporate them. But before I shut up here, is there anybody who has any questions or comments or things that you've been learning that you think could be helpful to the group? Yeah. I think a big thing is educating them. When I've had interesting conversations with young people, young athletes, but young people too, talking about, because they feel some of this stuff, but explaining to them what social media, the effect of social media and how it's creating challenges. There's a direct correlation to the amount of time you spend on Facebook and Instagram and how depressed and anxious you feel. That's just a fact for all of us. When I share that with them, at least it makes them think about how much time they're spending on the phone. If you have a team that wants to be special, can you challenge them? You can't make them or mandate it, but can you challenge them to not be on their phones right before the game or at halftime or right after the game and have an old school locker room? You have to sell them like you have to sell them on a scheme. You have to sell them on this culture and how it can separate your franchise. It can separate your team, but you have to sell them on it. Like, why is this worth it to them? Because it's going to be very uncomfortable for them to not just get on their phone and them have to talk to each other. Maybe you challenge them not to do it on the bus on the way to the game, whatever it is. But I think the more we educate them on how this stuff is affecting them in a negative way and how it can be an edge, which we're all looking for, maybe you get some progress there. I know we did in Seattle, just by them having an understanding of how they tick and why they're struggling in some areas and how they could get an edge in this area. And then again, explaining the learning environments too, that takes care of intrinsically a lot of their deficiencies, because you're fostering environments that allow them to grow in these areas and care more about internal things. Yeah, you have.
because they might not have the access as some other players do, you know. So I see this all the time. Guys struggling, they may see another athlete get offers. He was probably in the 8th grade, so he's hyped up on social media to learn or to try to get that same type of hype. So I think kids that's getting offers at an early age kind of mess with their head too.
No doubt, and please hear me. I'm not faulting them. One of my main goals for this talk is that we understand them and work with it. You know, it's not their fault. This is how they've been raised. And so how can we work with them and then also supplement in some of these areas? And that's why I shared the learning environment that will naturally do some of that and promote some of that. And I do think educating them helps. You know, like I said, the pickup is so valuable. You know, I used to do some things in Seattle to supplement some of this, to recreate pickup situations. I think there's so much value. So, for example, speaking of end of game, before I would go into my philosophies and this, that, and the other, I'd split them up into 2 teams, put a situation on the clock, on the time, and let them coach themselves. And it was usually crazy, you know, like them trying to draw up plays and they wouldn't even draw enough players on the board. And I mean, it was funny. But it's breeding all of this stuff. And it also, now when they realize they can't do it by themselves very well, there's an openness to maybe they do need a little coaching because they tried it first. But you also learn some things about who they trust and that kind of thing. I used to make them pick their own teams sometimes. We'd have a defensive drill where you got to get 3 stops in a row, no paint, and we're going to be in the gym until you get 3 stops in a row. So we might be here 45 minutes, hour, but we're not stopping. And that got tested a few times, and they knew I was serious. And I know this is kind of old school and can't do this in a lot of NBA practices, but maybe you incorporate it however you incorporate it. And then I would say, okay, Sue, pick your 4 teammates. Or I'd pick a rookie, Stewie, pick your 4 teammates. You got to get 3 stops in a row. So now the friendships go out the window because they don't want to be out there all day. And now when I have a meeting with this player who's wondering why they're not playing, I say, your teammates aren't picking you. You got to earn people's trust. It's not about me. I'm just making a decision based on what is shown here. And it takes some of the pressure off us too. Like I said, they care way more about what their peers think than me. So if their peers are not picking them for the dog drill, now they have to look in the mirror. That's not, the coach doesn't like them. Or there's politics. It's your teammates don't trust you. And I don't have to say that. That's obvious. Make sense? Yeah.
What I'm wondering about technologically, can we try to communicate more effectively with them through
Technology?
what they're comfortable already doing?
You got to know that's their comfort. So you meet them where they're at in hopes of getting them where you want to be. We know their comfort is texting or whatever. We got to meet them there. You know, we got to have people on your staff that it's got, you know, there's a lot of talk about diversity, blah, blah, blah. I don't even like all the talk about it because I get the backlash from it. But this generation and CEOs of all major companies have asked me to come in and speak because the data is showing that diversity moves the needle. And this generation, it's the most diverse generation ever, and they value it. They fight for it. So whether they like it, it's comfortable for them. Gay people, white people, black people, females, black, white, Puerto Rican, Asian, they value diversity, and they actually, it's a passion of theirs. So that's not just, you know, important because it's a passion of theirs. You don't know which one's going to identify with who, but it, you know, it's also like having diversity of age, stage of life. That's all very important. That's just leadership. Every boardroom's better when you got different perspectives, and your team is going to respond better when there's a lot of different types of voices, styles of communication, personality, leadership, and methods of teaching. And so you got to have some young guys on your staff that can speak the technological language, and and then you got to try to incorporate the other types of diversity and ways of thinking and personalities.
Jenny, what you're saying is something that I've been battling for a long time now. And they call me old school because I am. But one of the things that we talked about, or I talked about with my team this year going into the playoffs, and we was able to go deep, outside noise. And what you was referring to, the media, what I wanted our guys to do is put away their phones. This is something that LeBron talks about all the time. You have to get away from social media. And how do you get your players away from that? Because that outside noise that people are giving them, it can't help them. The only thing that can help them are the 15 players that are in that locker room. And that was the thing that I wanted our guys to focus on is they can't help you. Your parents, your agent, your friends, your boys, no one can help us beat Milwaukee or beat New York. And you're listening to what, all these media people are saying, talk radio, your friends, your parents. None of them can help you. The only people that can help you in this house are the people in this house, and not the people that are outside giving you instructions or telling you what you should be doing. And, so that was the focus that I had, that I put out with our players. Block out the outside noise. And, you hear LeBron say all the time that I'm off of social media right now. Some people feed off of that. Some people, it affects them. I listen to no talk radio, no television. When I do have the TV on, I tell my coach, it's muted because I don't want to hear it. Those guys really can't help me. The only people that can help me are the people in that room, in that locker room. So this is a battle, guys. I like what you said about giving them something to talk about at halftime. Put 2, 3, 4 things up on the board because they do go right to the phone, and it gets under my skin, and I've learned to adapt and ignore, but giving them something because they go right to that phone and they're looking at what, their family members or agents or, someone in the stands or someone who's watching the game is texting to them at halftime, and they're not paying attention to what the coaches are saying. They're thinking about what that person who is texting them. So we have to find ways for them to block out that outside noise. Not that it's, you can't keep them off of it, but they can't help you. Your parents can't help you in this locker room right now when we are trying to give you instructions on what we need to do out on that floor. The only people that can help you are the people right here in this room.
So good. I really think we all look for edges. The coaches and the teams that can understand and subscribe. Look what they did. You're gonna have an edge. So it's a challenge for all of us to sell this to our team and understand the effects of social media on them individually and as a team, so they can take ownership of that and hold each other accountable to it. It's a drug for them. Again, the more we understand it, the better we can hopefully sell this. It releases dopamine in their brain. When they scroll through these social media apps, these guys know what they're doing. I'm sure you guys have seen some of the stuff on Netflix that make these apps. When they scroll through and they don't know what's going to come up next, it's like doing the slot machine. Literally, the same response in your brain. And they get a like, or they get a ding, or they get a ding. And these social media companies actually have different timing of when they do it to keep these guys hooked, because it's releasing dopamine in the brain every time they get a ding on their phone, a notification. They scroll through. Literally, it's dopamine, which is what you get released in your brain when you take a drug. And it's that addictive. If they could even understand how they're being manipulated, I think maybe they'd be like, yo, I don't want to be controlled like that. Like, how do you find your way of communicating this to them? And any edge you can get in that way, I think will be an edge for your players and your team.
I think for me, and one of the things we talk about all the time with a bunch of our young players that we've had recently is just when it comes to player development is the dynamic of what you do with them on a court for an hour each day. Like, we've had a bunch of guys in all summer, and they're in there for an hour. And the dynamic we all know with young guys coming out is you have them for 2 hours, and then they're gone for the next 20 hours, right? And they're by themselves. They're 19, they're 20 years old sometimes. They don't have anybody they're living with. And you get your 2 hours of good with them, and then they go and they do all these things we're talking about by themselves, and they sit there, and then you come back, and you're starting all over again the next day. And, you know, we've talked a lot, like, what is more important, that hour on the court or trying to find a way to go to them, go to lunch with them, go take them, play tennis, go golfing, whatever. Spend time with them as a person. Is that more important at this point with some of these kids than the hour on the court where you work on, you know, their jump shot?
I think that's awesome. I mean, like I said, there's a gap there in their relationship skills that we have to try to find a way to fill. I don't know what that looks like for all of us. I definitely don't have answers to a lot of this, but it's just good for us to think about. Like, how can we meet them where they're at and help grow them in these areas? Because the more confidence we build in them, the harder we can coach them. You know, the more we help them understand it's good and honorable to risk and make mistakes and put yourself out there and give them the skills to do that, we got a better athlete on our hands. So what are the ways we can do that? Whether it be learning tennis with them and we all look stupid, and that's cool, that's fun, that's how we grow. But being creative, all of us, and I mean, I would love to hear any other ideas you guys have of ways to fill in some of these gaps, because we're all dealing with the same thing, and it can be frustrating if we're just trying to do the same things over and over again and expecting different results. Anybody else have ideas? Or?
I mean, we did some stuff when I was with South Bay in the G League, and I didn't know why I was doing it, but it was a lot of the reasons you're talking about, and that was why I got into coaching, was like I didn't feel like I was connected, right? And so we would do like team activities where we're talking about family, where we're talking about adversity, we're talking about successes, failures, and heroes, and you know, your history, your past. And I thought it really did a good job with even groups that were unsuccessful on the court. It created a community, and when I hear you talk, I'm hearing you talk about community and teaching people the responsibilities of being part of a team, being part of a community, because you know, I grew up in a similar way to a lot of these kids. It's like I didn't have a town or a group of friends, so it was something that resonated deeply with me. No, one of the cool things that I saw when we started doing it is you see they become really addicted to learning about it, you know, and that's the really rewarding experience. So I'm really happy that you talked about this tonight, this morning. Oh,
that's really good, Coach. It's true, because a basic human need of all of us is authentic connection. We want to be known and loved, but you can't, you know, these are like gooey things, so we can't talk about it like that. But it's a basic human need that when we have a thirst for it and we actually experience it, I do think it can become addictive for them, because deep down we all need it. And I don't think this generation knows how much they need it, because they think they're connected based on the number of followers they have and these false connections that they have. So how can we let them experience the real thing, and then it won't compare after that? That's what the beauty of team is, when we've all been a part of a real one.
You were able to you were able to implement your player development views for the whole team. But now you go to a different team and you're an assistant coach, and it's a challenge to sell to the player maybe what you've been doing all your life is not exactly what we're going to do here, but we think it's going to help you more. But at the same time, the player may turn around, and then on the other basket, somebody else is working with another player with a philosophy that's probably different than yours. How do you handle that social situation in which, like, you're trying to sell your player that you may be doing things a different way that may help them better, but then somebody else is not?
Okay, now we're getting into staff dynamics and assistant coaching 101. You know, you got to pick your spots. It depends. You know, like, since I've been in the NBA, a lot of it's been conversations. You know, Dave Yeager was really interested in this. Really interested. He has 2 teenage daughters. He's feeling some of this at home, feeling it as a coach. We had a really interesting dialogue, and then he takes it and uses it how he wants. And same thing with Rick. You know, we've had a lot of really interesting conversations. Steven Silas, who has 2 teenage daughters, it's just, you know, how can we talk about it as a staff, be creative, and then, you know, I've had opportunity in some of my individual workouts, like I had the opportunity to work with DeAndre Jordan, who, as we all know, struggled with free throws for a long time, and we incorporated some of these principles. There wasn't even a lot. We have a great shooting coach in Dallas. We have a lot of people helping him, but they went to China for 2 weeks, and I just didn't give him any information, but put him in some situations for his body to kind of figure out something, and he had a really good free throw shooting year. He slipped back now, and it wasn't anything I did or said. It was just putting him in situations for his body to kind of be, and his brain to be freed up a little bit and figure some things out on his own. So every now and then you get an opportunity to pick your spots and play with it a little bit, and then sometimes you don't, based on the hierarchy and based on your job description, and you wait. You wait until you have an opportunity, maybe your next job, next place, because as an assistant coach, your job is to align. Even if you don't believe, you align or you leave. That's our job. We don't contradict our culture that we're a part of and our coaches that we're working for and with, ideally. Good? Okay, thank you guys.
You know, when you think about a clinic and you think, why are we here? I always think, like, you know, you come to a clinic, if I can get one thing that will make me better as a coach or make my team better. And, you know, when I walked in this morning, I saw Nate McMillan walk in the door, and I'm thinking to myself, why is that guy here? You look at what he's done in his career, and you look at the success he had even just this year, he should be sleeping in, right? I mean, I would think so. But, you know, he makes a comment on Jenny's presentation here that, hey, I like what you did on the halftime thought. And can you imagine, like, Nate McMillan taking one thing away from this and being a better coach? That's our purpose for being here. So I thought Sean Sweeney did a great job with his presentation, bombarded us with a lot of information. Jenny's presentation, fantastic. Let's take just a real quick 5-minute break, and then we'll come back with Quinn Schneider. Perfect. Let's move on to our last speaker. This is kind of a fun one for me personally, because I've had a chance to work with Quinn 2 different times. Many years ago, we were assistant coaches with the LA Clippers when he was a very young coach, still could play. And then we worked together a second time at the University of Missouri. And, you know, it's been interesting to watch Quinn's progress as a coach. And, you know, you look at a guy like this and say, wow, here's Quinn Schneider, NBA coach. But, you know, if you sorry, Jenny, but Google Quinn. But if you do it, you know, you'd see the track he had to get to where he's gotten today. But, you know, the neatest thing for me today is to introduce him simply as, here's Quinn Schneider, now recognized as one of the very best coaches in the NBA. And I can tell you this, a very dear friend of mine, Quinn Schneider.
First of all, thanks, John. It's great to see you, and don't see enough of you. That's kind of how this job goes, right? I thought it really made me think when John was talking about, everybody's got a different path. And today, this topic really for me goes back a long time, from an assistant coach at Duke and the way we played, going to Missouri, having 2 traditional bigs and not having any idea how to use them because we were spacing and driving and attacking when I was an assistant at Duke. And then in the D League, I think at that point, this is something I became more and more aware of, because not only was your personnel different from year to year, but it could be different from week to week, from game to game. And, I was, when I first got there, we had Jan Mahimi, who really the team was built around. And we had a shooting 4 to space the floor. We had a point guard. We wanted to play pick and roll. We wanted to post him. And by the second year, third year, I remember going to Coach Pop and asking him, is it okay if we don't run, Spurs motion offense? Because it was hard. And he said, go ahead. And we really became a pick and roll team. And we had multiple pick and roll players, very similar actually to what our team looks like now. And so it's interesting how those things can come full circle. From that point, I went to Philly, and we had a different type of team. I went to the Lakers, with Mike Brown. I was fortunate to work for some really good coaches, Doug Collins in Philly. I went to Russia with Ettore Messina. Had a great experience there, got a chance to really absorb a lot of things in Europe. Came back to Atlanta. Coach Bud was there at that point. It was his first year. We were doing different things than we were in Russia. And then when I first started with the Jazz, Enes Kanter, Derek Favors, Rudy Gobert, and Trevor Booker. And coming from Atlanta, I think at that point in the league, and this is a trend I think you see a lot, is when teams are really successful, coaches, other teams try to emulate what, the style of play that brings success. And for me, that, it was pace and space. So when I started, that was the way that I wanted to play. It was what I was familiar with, and we wanted to force the tempo, play with pace. And after about a month into the season, when our pace, I think, was second to last in the league, Alex, you remember this, we sat down and was like, I don't know what the hell we're doing, but we can't play fast. So we changed how we played. We were forced to, and I began to think about who we had and how we needed to play relative to our personnel. And that was good for us. We needed to grind on you. It took us a while to create open shots. We were not a pick and roll team. We were mainly a dribble handoff team, some screening actions, but we weren't getting anything in transition because we were kind of smash mouth basketball. We wanted to make you guard us for a possession, and then we wanted to guard you. And that was the way that we had success. One side note on that is I found myself kind of defending that style of play, in particular because I'd been so vocal about playing with pace. So it was like, what changed? But we did go back, and in the late 90s when the Jazz had Stockton and Malone, they led the league in offense, and they played slower than we did that first year that we were at Utah. So I think it's emblematic of there's a lot of ways to play, and to the extent that it requires us as coaches to really understand who we have and try to put our players in positions to be successful. I think that's the most important team. I don't know, is Dell Demps here tonight? Dell is coaching with our summer league staff, and when I was in Austin, he gave me at one point, I remember we were in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we had Andre Barrett, Kenton Paulino, Squeaky Johnson, Shane Gadsden, and Curtis Stinson. So he gave us 5 point guards on a 10-man roster. And I was like, Dell, what do you want me to do? And I finally decided, I started all 5 of them, and was just like, I wasn't making a point to Dell, but I knew none of them were going to be happy. So I figured I'd start all of them and kind of make my point that this is on Dell. So I blamed him. So anyway, that's the topic. Is this echoing? You guys, it's just an echo for me. We're okay? Okay. So we're going to go. This is Steve Klein. He's on our staff. And I just wanted to go through this. We've got some slides for you, talk a little bit philosophically, and then also show you some clips that may help draw some things out. And really, the idea is just to provide somewhat of a framework of the thought process that for us has evolved in order to make some of the changes that we've made from a team that was second to league in pace to a team this year that, you know, shot a lot of threes and tried to play fast because we felt like we could get open shots. So, okay, Steve. So I've kind of hit on this already, knowing your team. I think being willing to adjust, even if it's during the course of the season. When we got Mike Conley a couple years ago, Mike had played with Marc Gasol for the majority of his career, who could not be more different than Rudy Gobert. And it was a process of both Mike adjusting and me adjusting, probably more me than Mike. And I would joke with him and do now, and I'm glad it's a good joke because he's played so well. He's such a good player. But I told him I was screwing him up. There's no question about it, trying to put him in positions that he hadn't been in before. And that goes to this point here. I think it's important for us as coaches to really explain to your players why you're playing a certain way. And whether that's, you know, watching individual film, your assistants watching film with guys, we dove into some analytics that we feel really made, you know, an impact on our team. 2 years ago, we were one of the best shooting teams percentage-wise in the league from three. But we were also kind of in the middle of the pack as far as the attempts. So we really made an effort over the course of the previous year, prior to the bubble, and, you know, to get our guys to shoot more threes. And it just, you know, it made sense. Like, you can make them, you're a good shooter, shoot more of them. But it was interesting how many guys, you know, really had to embrace that and recognize those situations. So we tried to do that. And then the other thing, maybe the most important, if you're trying to use a player in a way that he doesn't believe in, you know, it's probably not going to be successful. So trying to figure out, you know, and even if you just listen to them, you don't always have to do what they say, because you may go back to this and continue. But that's the process, I think, that's important as you're adjusting, particularly during the year. Sometimes those adjustments can be the most, like, liberating thing for a player because they may be getting guarded a certain way. Joe Ingles, like, midway through the season, he hadn't played a lot of pick and roll. Suddenly, you know, coaches in the league, you know what they're doing. And suddenly people start sending Joe to his right hand, and pretty soon we're not running pick and roll for Joe. And that was frustrating for him. So how we want to adjust with Joe, the process that you went through, was also incumbent upon him. And I struggle at times with the concept of player development in a vacuum, where we talk about player development as being, you know, we think of that as one-on-one, sometimes two-on-two. And I guess the question I always want to know is when does it actually become coaching? You know, is it, if you're playing 2-on-2, you know, are you player development, or is it coaching? If you're playing 3-on-3, we all know once it's 5-on-5, it's coaching. So at some point, to me, those things really merge. And I think that's an important part of what we're doing, because it may be something that you want from your team that a player isn't necessarily able to do. So it can go both ways, you know, where players have to make adjustments to the way that you want to play. So this, to me, you know, I think adjusting is one thing, but if you try to play in a way that doesn't fit, you know, what you believe in as a coach, it's probably not going to be as good. You know, you're probably not going to be as good at teaching it. You're not going to be as readily holding guys accountable. So even if you're making changes and adjustments, I think there's things here. You know, for me, we want the ball to move. We want quick decisions. You know, we want to take open shots. We want to be unselfish. You know, all those things, no matter how we're playing, you know, we're going to try to demand from our guys. And that goes, you know, to everybody kind of asking yourself what it is, you know, that you believe in. Because if you believe in it, you're going to be able to teach it. And I think you are going to be able to hold guys accountable to the extent that, you know, you really believe what you're talking about. This is a big one. I think
You know, and this is kind of what I was referring to a little bit in the D League. With your players change. You know, they change year to year. They may change within a season. Combinations change. I mentioned Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert. Mike is a very different player than Ricky Rubio. We had Ricky the year before, and Rudy Gobert, you know, I think he broke the league record for dunks because Ricky was in the lane and throwing the lob. Mike in the lane was a different player. He had a floater. He could make his floater. So kind of players getting to know each other in combinations. Lineups, you know, it's kind of, you know, how you use players with one another. You know, do you play a guy a longer stretch? Do you play a guy a shorter stretch in order to get different combinations and lineups together? And that goes, you know, across the board. And then injuries is a huge one. You know, I think, you know, we all want to be, it's really being lucky if you don't get somebody hurt during the course of the year, no matter how much you work to mitigate those things. So I think being prepared to adjust to injuries as well. We lost a couple of our point guards towards the end of the season, and Joe Ingles ended up playing point guard. And he was good at it, but he was better at it, you know, against certain players in certain situations. So that's a big one to me as far as really looking at that, okay? Okay, this is really how we've tried to think about, you know, how do we get an advantage? You know, eventually you know, obviously if you got a layup, that's kind of the ultimate advantage. Open shots, whatever it is you're creating, and sometimes those advantages are big ones and they're, you know, really easy to recognize, and sometimes they're smaller. I mentioned before about pace and transition. That's something that's really changed for us. We are a pick and roll team. That's who we are. We have multiple pick and roll players. You know, we have one of the best rollers in the league in Rudy Gobert, and a lot of what we've gravitated towards more and more has been pick and roll. And when you think about pick and roll, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, there's a lot of variables that go into pick and roll. Is it pick and roll with the 5? Is it pick and roll with Mike Conley? Is it Donovan Mitchell? You know, is it small pick and roll? And figuring out how you want, you know, to run pick and roll. So these are the actions to me that you can use to create an advantage. Handoffs, dribble handoffs. You know, you watch Denver play. Jokic is, you know, he's Jokic. And, you know, a lot of what they do is him with the ball in handoff situations, and that really fits their personnel. For us, that's not Rudy's strength. We put him in those situations at times, but when teams really begin to scout us, those are things that they try to take away that are harder for us to execute. Screening actions is a big one. We run a lot of wide pin downs. I'm not giving anything away. You guys know all that. So Nate will top lock our wide pin downs, and then we got to adjust to that. And that's part of it too. You know, what are your counters to these things? Because you guys know as well as I do, coaches watch film and they have game plans. So, but for us, you know, more wide pin downs than tight pin downs, because the wide pin downs allows our wings to get into the lane, and it almost creates a pick and roll situation. Or if someone gaps a wide pin down, you know, do we flip the screen? And then we do have pick and roll. Post ups, you know, you hear a lot about, you know, the game gravitating away from the post, and that's probably true, but selectively, you know, I think throwing the ball to the post can still be a really good thing, whether you're playing through the post. For us, our best post-up player right now is Bojan Bogdanovic. Previous to that, we had Boris Diaw, so playing through Boris on the post, very different than Bojan. And Bojan's better with a mismatch. So how do you use Bojan? If we just throw it to him, it's more difficult for him than if we can find a mismatch situation for him. So really emphasizing that. And the last thing, you know, I think isolation. And this is something that we've really evolved with, where we didn't have guards that could necessarily get by. That's just, you know, Mike Conley can get by. So how do we space and allow the guys that we have, you know, Donovan Mitchell can create a shot, and, you know, Jordan Clarkson can create a shot. So if you don't like isolation and you got guys that can go by, you may want to rethink that. As much as you hear people saying he's dribbling too much, that's not good basketball. Sometimes that's the best basketball you can get. We had a 9 dribble rule for Jordan Clarkson. We were watching tape with our team one time, and this kind of goes back to trying to sell them on adjustments. And he had a possession where he must have dribbled, 13 times, and he scored. And our whole team was like this. So I kept looking for one where he dribbled 13 times and he didn't score. And I showed it in front of the team. And the message was JC, and it was kind of lighthearted depending on, because he's pretty good at it. I didn't want him to stop trying to score off the dribble. But the next game, we came to a timeout, and we agreed on a 9 dribble rule. And it was important for the other guys on the team to know that even though he had a lot of rope in his isolations, that we actually were aware of it, if anything. The next game, I don't know how many times he dribbled, but I called timeout, and I was like, Jordan, what happened to the 9 dribble rule? And he immediately tells me, he's coach, that doesn't count in the backcourt. So I was like, all right, you got me. So in any event, you're not always going to get what you want. Go ahead, next one, Steve. Okay, so transition. The first way we're talking about creating an advantage. Go ahead. So guys running with space. We try to run our big to the rim, especially if he doesn't defensive rebound. If he gets a defensive rebound, we're going to have different spacing. I don't feel like it's realistic for Rudy to outlet the ball and then get ahead of the play. But we do want to pressure the rim, and we want what we call over the top. Just simple, but you try to name it so they can see it. So over the top. Go ahead. In this situation, pick and roll being the action. 3-5 pick and roll, which is different than 1-5 pick and roll. Okay? Small pick and roll. Against the switch, he peels out. Another action. I mentioned handoffs. Go ahead. Joe getting into the lane, and we've got shooting, so we have space. And then screening actions. Here's the wide pin down we talked about. So trying to find multiple actions. And Joe going to his left hand, whether it's pick and roll, throwing the lob, finishing, some of those things that become evident. Okay. Again, pick and roll into a screening action. So a lot of times you can combine actions. And when we combine an action, we call it an entry into an action. So whether it's pick and roll into a screening action, whatever combinations of those things that you have, that's another way to look at, I've got somebody that's good in wide pin downs. How can I get Nate not to top block that? How are we get what we want? Okay. Post up. This is just a straight duck in because he has the mismatch. And in this case, we're playing through the post. Okay. So talking about getting an advantage, we talk about getting it, those different ways to get it, pick and roll, dribble, handoff, screen, etc., and then keeping it, okay? Keeping it's more about spacing, quick decisions. We like to have our guys make a decision before they catch the ball. You don't necessarily have to see the ball the entire time you catch it and then read. We want to read before the catch, which helps us keep an advantage, and then using the advantage. And one of the things, we just call this break the paint. It's really simple. Different teams do it all different kinds of ways. But this is the drill we have, and we'll put different times on the shot clock as well to try to drive it. And this is just over the top. You saw this on the first video. Okay, bigs ahead. Sorry, that was pass ahead. You can rewind it, Steve. Pretty simple, right? Getting to the corners. All right, throwing ahead to the corner. Making sure we're trying to flatten the defense, the bigs behind, and everything's quick decisions. And we're breaking the paint before we shoot. Okay? Same thing, pass across. We're just going to skip it. Okay, and you can see the go and catch. And then again, the ball's moving. Stop. So one of the things that during that sequence that I think is really important if you're going to be attacking the paint is what we call feet and fakes. So when you get into the lane, sometimes not extending, keeping your feet, playing off 2 feet, using pass fakes. And we talk about 3 ways you can fake: with your body, with the ball, and with your eyes. And, you know, another example of showing a player something, you know, I think the guy that we all remember that, you know, this move right here, you know, Rajon Rondo, that should give everybody a visual, but go ahead. So Mike seeing that, go ahead, good. And then kicking out. So using fakes as we get into the paint. And then attacking the 45. So hopefully our spacing gives us those early reads, and that's trying to score in transition with spacing. And it's always nice when we work on something as coaches, you see it start to manifest itself in the game. Go ahead. So this is the pass across. Breaking the paint. It's what I'd rather not see. But just keeping the advantage throughout the possession. You know, guys running, if they're confident they're going to get the ball, and continuing to move it. Okay, so the instance notes here just says teams. We try to differentiate between misses and makes. So on misses, we want to run, space, and attack seams. And in this case, it's a make. And so the concept of if there's a make for us, you know, not necessarily accepting that we want to slow down. Usually it's harder, obviously, to run on makes, but blurring the line, okay, in these situations between, you know, transition opportunities, okay, and more traditional half-court offense. Okay. Hope I'm not getting too granular on all this stuff. So one other thing to think about as you're looking at your team and trying to decide, you know, what you want to do, that we like to think of these different situations as how a possession starts. You know, are you getting a rebound or turning the ball over? That's going to be very different than if you have a dead ball in a side out of bounds play. So to think about what you want to do in all these different situations. You know, if there is something you feel a guy not being able to get a shot in a certain situation and there's a side out of bounds play, do you have something you can immediately go to target that guy and get him a shot? Okay? We're going to talk a little bit about flow, okay? Because for us, if we want to run and shoot, and we run and we try to shoot early, but if we're open. So this is, and the concept of flow, you know, everybody has flow, motion, you know, whatever you refer to it as. And that's really the area where philosophically, you know, we want, and I personally want to see certain things that we believe in as a staff. So this is an area where, you know, the most evolution, you know, I mentioned the 4 traditional bigs we had, and then gravitating now where, you know, I don't know if Royce O'Neal or Bojan Bogdanovic or Joe Ingles is a 3 or a 4. I know Rudy Gobert is a center. And I think we have to be careful. You know, you hear a lot of talk about positional basketball. And I think how you approach a situation, you know, can really reflect that. So we want our guys to play together. This goes back to some of the philosophical stuff. I believe in giving guys responsibility. And I think the variety and unpredictability, you know, is where something like flow can be really useful, okay? Because it's more difficult to scout. It's also more difficult to execute as the game slows down. So sometimes what you're doing in the first 2-3 quarters isn't nearly as effective late, just understanding that. But for us, you know, this is where there's been a lot of adjustments over time. And the other thing to me that's really useful in this is there are certain teams, we have a balanced team. You know, Joe's capable of making plays, Donovan, Mike, Bojan, and in certain situations, if we're calling a play for a specific player, let's give one example is, say Donovan hits 2-3 shots in a row. Mike wants to keep going to Donovan, Donovan feels like Boyan hasn't touched it in a while, so he wants to pass the ball to Boyan. And suddenly I'm on the sidelines trying to make a decision about who gets a shot on a given possession. So playing this way out of concepts, I think, shifts some of that responsibility to the players. And again, the other situations where we have, an out of bounds, an ATO, a free throw, a dead ball, I think that's where, at least for us, more comfortable, being more definitive about what we're doing. So this is what we looked like from a spacing standpoint my first year. And we decided, we wanted to run whoever the first big was to the weak side block to open up the 45 to attack. And, after watching Rudy in the Olympics, I'm going to have a problem next year because he got the ball in the post more, and he's going to want to run why he didn't get to run there. We're not playing this way anymore, so I don't have to deal with this. But we ran our big to the weak side. And in this case, we say 5 trails, but this was a traditional big, and you can see. We got Boris Diaw, and Boris can play through the post, especially pass out of the post. So we wanted to throw it in, and we wanted a screening concept primarily for Gordon Hayward and some of the other guys that we had that we felt like could make plays and shoot the ball, and Boris was such a great passer. So Cito Alonso from Bilbao, this was what we called Bilbao action. And I think just like we name a play, to identify and name a concept is important because you can talk about that concept in a scouting situation or during the course of the game, and guys know what you want. So playing through the post with similar spacing. Okay? Now again, we did start to differentiate when we got Boris, Joe Johnson, Jay Crowder. Those guys were definitely 4s, and we were more centers and forward. Okay? And this is a situation, again, out of flow, where Boris is in trail as opposed to the first big down. So we wanted a different concept out of this. We started out with a staggered pin down here. People started top blocking it and switching it up the line. So we ended up with a straight pin down here instead of the guard coming up. So again, all kinds of things that you look at and players teach you and really other coaches teach you. The ability to adjust when someone's playing something a certain way. Okay. And you guys, people are familiar with this, playing through the elbows, go ahead. It's also interesting to see the evolution of the league. Watching Coach Adelman years ago, even his Sacramento teams and the way that they played, and then seeing Boston's point action, cutting through the gut. We tried to make it variable where you could cut strong side, cut to the gut, and cut the weak side, and players recognize that. So I think as the game progresses throughout the league, you see different teams playing out of different concepts, and when a lot of teams start playing out of a concept, whether it's the NBA, Europe, whatever level, that probably means that defenses are going to respond and they're going to get better guarding that concept. So just another thing to think about. Okay, so we've evolved really to this, and there's some adjustments that we've got to look at making going into next year, but our personnel is largely going to be the same, so I don't think that process is going to be as significant. And I do have kind of differentiating on the one, which can be a problem for us. Joe really likes to bring the ball up, and there'll be timeouts where it just feels like he's pounding it, and we're playing 3-5 pick and roll, 3-5 pick and roll, and we've got a more traditional point guard, running to the weak side. And, I start feeling that way, and then one of the guys on the staff's like, Quinn, we've scored like 3 out of 4 possessions. So, trying to feel that and understand that and give guys, again, the ability to play. Go ahead. So this is 5 in trail, just with a little pin down. And that's with Donovan and Mike in the game, okay? And then we started trying to bring the 5 up to the elbow. This was an action that really that we struggled with this year. It's kind of like I was talking about, as people really began to defend it more. We saw different ways people defended it, and we gravitated away from it. But just this hot cut into the post. And this particular action started as a play. We had some success with the play, and then we tried to incorporate it as a concept into what we're doing. And again, the concept, you see the tight curl and the guy pops, okay? All right? So the other thing that started happening to us, teams start switching a lot against us, and suddenly the way that we're playing right there becomes less effective. So we wanted to play more 4-out. So now we're running the big just flat, and we're trying to take advantage of some guys that we feel like can get in the lane, break the paint, and try to attack, that way versus a team that's switching 1 through 5 and taking us out of things in pick and roll that are, that require different spacing. Go ahead. And this gets back a little bit, keep playing, Steve, to some of the player development stuff. As you've seen more small pick and roll, you guys know who the players on your team are. Rick knows this. We run Jordan Clarkson and Mike Conley and, 1-2 pick and roll at the end of the quarter. And Jordan's really good in the roll. Mike can play against the slip. That's a really good concept in action for us, small. Hopefully, when we're playing out of flow, those 2 guys will find that, and the other guys on the team know that they're good at it. If we're playing that way, and I want Royce O'Neal to be better at rolling, I want to show him film and clips of other guys in the league that are doing that. In a player development situation, we want to put those guys together and have them work together and develop that concept, whether it's for a play or it's for something else, that we're doing in the course of a game. All right? I'll go over this quickly, but this for us is really important. We tried to label different areas on the court where we played pick and roll. And it just gave us an opportunity to figure out who's good at what. So these different areas, essentially, deep corner, sideline, angle, middle. We just tried to name them different stuff because actually I was at Summer League when I was coaching in Austin, and I was sitting with Coach Pop, and there was a former assistant from the Spurs, a really younger guy, and he was with a different team, and they were calling out a lot of the terminology that the Spurs used, and I was sitting there next to Pop, and he their whole communication system is getting put on full display in Summer League, and I promised he wasn't real happy. So I promised myself if I was ever lucky enough to get a job in the NBA that I'd try not to call what we do too close to what the Spurs do. So in any event, these different areas, Joe Ingles and Rudy Gobert, really good here. Mike Conley, really good here. Better on this side than this side. So the location for Mike Conley, well, first of all, the personnel, Joe and Rudy, because Joe's big, can pass over the top. This position right here for Mike, and this took us a while to figure out, what is your spacing? Okay, and then what are the angles of the screen, and how are you being guarded? And if you can think about your players that way, particularly if you're designing a play, you want to try to put them in the situations. When people started really dropping their big against us, middle pick and roll wasn't as good. The angles weren't as good. We needed to play more from the sideline. So all those things come into play as you're thinking about, different players and again, how they're being guarded. I don't think there's anyone better than Manu Ginobili, in angle pick and roll playing downhill. That's a sweet spot and that's late game. For us, Mike Conley's really good here. So is Donovan Mitchell. So what are we doing in different situations? I mentioned Mike Conley and Jordan Clarkson here in small pick and roll. Okay. So we see right here where Rudy gets a crack, Mike gets back middle, he likes his right hand, and he's got a shot. So hands become also important. particularly if you can manufacture that. You know, we've got a couple lefties, and sometimes it's challenging because there's a play that we run on one side of the court that's way more effective than if we run it on the other side of the court. That's where we run into problems playing out of flow, where that variety kind of starts to work against us. So, you know, being able to call plays and try to find guys their sweet spots and adjusting your plays to your personnel. I mean, that's really what we're talking about in all this stuff. What is your pick and roll for this player versus that player? You know, what are the screening actions? If you've got Kyle Korver and he can really shoot off the move, you know, what are you doing for him? Is he better shooting coming to his right? Is he better shooting coming to his left? Okay. Donovan, similar situation, likes to get left. You know, he can get right as well, but where Mike just went middle, Donovan and Rudy know that flipping of the angle in that same location ends up being this shot for Donovan. Okay, when Mike does go left, you know, attacking downhill, but he really likes to cut back, and this is one of the things that this is where I felt like I really screwed him up, because, you know, like a lot of teams, and especially for us this past couple of years, we've wanted the three and we've wanted the rim, and I'm a big believer in the mid-range, but situationally. And Mike, throughout his whole career, first of all, people never know if he's right-handed or left-handed. So that I didn't know either. So which direction is he best going? Well, going right, that's his floater. Going left is like a downhill long layup. So we saw him go right and hit the three. Okay, now where there was a crack and Donovan took that shot, Mike likes to cut back to his right hand. Rudy knows that. He gets a crack, he lets him cut back, he rolls opposite, and this is Mike's floater. And the discussion that we had was the location of his floater. And this gets more to shot selection, but it goes also to some of the analytics stuff. Him shooting the floater from there or there or there made a big difference. And trying to sell him on not settling for that floater too soon, where he doesn't give Rudy a chance to roll, versus keeping the ball a little longer and getting to this spot, was really important for us. Okay, Joe in pick and roll likes to go left. That's why people send him right. And he's downhill right now, and he's going quick to the rim, and Rudy's got to know that and get out quick. Again, we're looking at coverage. Zubac has dropped. Okay, now people start weakening Joe, all right? They won't give him his left hand. This was a shot that he really needed to work on. You know, otherwise we can't run pick and roll with Joe. If people start switching 3-5 pick and roll, and we don't have a counter to 3-5 pick and roll with Joe because he's uncomfortable, it's hard for us to run 3-5 pick and roll. So what is Joe doing? Obviously this year he was, you know, a little busy in the summer with the Olympics, but this was a shot that he really had to work on. Right there. And then like we had with Mike, Joe in pick and roll, again getting weaked. Instead of taking the shot, cutting back to his left hand and getting downhill. So I can't emphasize enough the whole player development thing. Because there's something, you can't cater to every player at the same time. So there's got to be certain things guys have to get better at in order for your team to function. Okay, and here's what I was talking about with Mike's floater. And this would be that deep corner pick and roll that we talked about on that little diagram. And that's the one that he doesn't miss that shot. So if I can help get him that shot, you know, I'm doing my job, okay? This, I'm gonna do them on time, okay? This to me is a big thing. And John, you may not remember this. I think it was Mr. Iba. And when we were at Missouri, we talked about what the definition of a good shot was. And I've changed it a little bit. But first of all, it was an open shot. Secondly, it's like, who's taking it? You know, like who's taking the shot? Because there's a lot of guys, they don't have to be open, and it's still a really good shot. The next thing kind of goes to the same is the personnel. You know, we want high percentage shots, which could be open shots, but then personnel, who's taking it, and then the timing of the shot. I mentioned the mid-range. You know, the playoffs, end of the game, if you've got a guy that can create a shot and get to the mid-range, okay, and get a bucket, particularly at the end of the clock, even during the course of the game, end of quarter, you know, there's the timing of a shot. One of the things that we used to talk about was, you know, is it a shot you can offensive rebound? Is it a shot that you can defend against? And I think those things kind of go together. When I mentioned before, us trying to shoot more threes because we're shooting a high percentage. 2 years ago, or I guess it hasn't been that long, a little over a year ago, we were playing in OKC, and we knew we wanted to shoot more threes, but our guys weren't taking them. They were just turning down shots. They were shot faking, they were catching, they weren't reading before the catch, and we came up with this drill, and we only ended up doing it one time because the season ended because of COVID. So we ended up naming it the 19 drill. It seemed appropriate. And so the biggest thing on that was, in order to shoot more threes, your players have to, like, if you run a play for somebody, they know the plays for them. ATO may be the best example, right? You go into a huddle, you come out, the plays for, you know, Rudy. So you may even turn the ball over trying to get him the ball in that play. Same thing is true in the course of a game. If a player can recognize a situation where he's going to be open and we want to take that shot, the chances of him taking it go way up. So what we do in practice, you know, to emphasize and recognize as much as anything, I think was something that was important for us to try to get our attempts up. So this is, you know, you'll just see this in practice. You know, it looks pretty simple. We've got that clip later, right? The 19 stuff? Okay. So the other thing with this is, if you're telling someone not to take a shot, what do you want them to do? It's like, that's not a good shot. Okay, that's great, coach. Then what should I do? If you don't have an alternative to that situation, you're putting your player in a tough spot. So you're going to impact these things right here. I mentioned the 9 dribble rule, okay? If Jordan Clarkson suddenly feels like the coach doesn't want him to dribble, well, that takes away a big part of his game. So being able to identify, you know, what's the alternative? You know, for Jordan, like, do you have an opportunity to get a catch and shoot 3 before you just put it down and start going into isolation? You know, if people are sending you left and I'm telling you that's not a great shot, you know, how can you get back to your right hand? So all those things to me are really important as you're coaching shot selection, which again, is part of adjusting to our personnel. What I'm allowing, asking, wanting JC to do is different than what I want Boyan to do, okay? Okay, now we just tried to name what these shots are. You saw in the previous clips, you know, passing ahead. We want that corner 3. Anytime we can get that corner 3, you know, we've got a couple guys that are top 10 in the league on the catch and shoot corner 3, you know, with 6 seconds or less on the shot clock. So if they're not taking that, if they're turning that shot down for whatever reason, you know, we're not on the same page and we're not taking advantage of what we're good at, and we've got to adjust to our personnel. Okay. We've got a couple guys that played for us a few years ago that would prefer to play for us now because that shot's become a good shot. So the pass ahead, and then, you know, the guy that makes the pass, trailing, kind of trying to simulate the pass back with a walk-up 3. And we're just rotating through lines, and all we're doing is emphasizing that that's a shot that we want, okay? So now we want to attack through the 45 in the same action, look for the skip, and then get, in that case, Donovan to respace. Space, respace, space, respace. Same situation. One thing just to add on these drives through the 45, and we talked about fakes and feet. I really believe if you cross the midpoint line before you make a pass, you see guys go in, jump off 1 foot, if this is the middle of the lane, and they jump up and try to make a pass. 1, the spacing on the pass gets messed up, and 2, they can't play behind them. So trying to get guys to stop in this area, it's a big point of emphasis for Royce O'Neal because I want him to be able to make plays in the paint. Kind of if not, then what? I don't want to tell him, don't go in there. But at the same time, if he is going in there, what is he doing and how can he make a play and how can he be effective? Okay. So the whole idea of respacing as a way to get a 3. Too often we pass the ball and stop playing. Okay. And then just dribble handoffs. Go ahead. We're pitching back to a trailer. You see a lot of these concepts with plays, but trying to recognize them in the course of a game. And again, after you pitch, we're working on respacing to the corner and getting that 3. Okay, the next one, pitch up. We're just pitching. Nope, we don't have the pitch up. We have the pitch up. It's the same thing. Instead of pitch this way, you're pitching to the corner. Okay, so this gives us an example of some of these things in our 19 drill that hopefully we're finding in the games. Passing across and shooting the 3. And that's a big one right there. That I'm using Jordan a lot, so that's not a shot that he was comfortable taking. That was a shot that he put on the floor, and try to make a play. And I really believe that making that an emphasis and drilling down to him, his 3-point attempts went from 4 to 8. That's a pretty big jump, and I think his game has evolved throughout his career where a lot of that's a natural evolution as well. Okay. So we passed across and then pass ahead. And Boyan's one of the guys that can make a corner 3. Attacking through the 45 and then the skip. So I think getting those guys taking those shots also helps with your spacing. Okay. Here's the one you saw early on. And it's not exactly the same as the drill because drills always try to simulate something, but I think, again, guys find concepts. Okay. So part of this too, is going to involve throughout the drill, how are they guarding this handoff situation? Is the team going under? Is the team switching? Are they trying to blow it up? So another thing we try to do at times is just to add coaches in these situations and tell the guys this is how they're guarding it. One of the things we've had a hard time getting our guys to do is to shoot behind just on a switch. And that's something, if I could get Boyan to take that shot every time. So Vince Lagarza is going to show Boyan him passing up that shot. And then we're going to show him the alternative when he passed it up and he shot faked and he drove in and he potentially turned it over. So coaching shot selection through this stuff. You want to talk about how you get Rudy shots, Alex? The whole time we do this, Rudy Gobert's at the other end watching these guys shoot 3s. And Alex has got him doing this, And then I don't let him do it in the game. And he says, if not, then what? I say, play defense. That's what. So you're really good at that. And you're the reason that we are who we are. Okay. Okay. This to me, every summer, whatever time, this happens throughout the course of the year too, but the summer's a great time, this is today in a lot of ways. And there's so many things that we do that we've borrowed, and taken from other coaches and also taken from players. I don't know who in the NBA right now doesn't know what a Euro step is. A credit to the European guys here. The first time I saw Navarro shoot a 1-foot floater, it's like, damn, no, I haven't seen that. You know, I think all the 2-foot floaters started in New York City with Rod Strickland, Mark Jackson, Kenny Anderson. I had theories on there was wind in the playground and all that, but I know those guys showed people. I asked Mike Conley where he got his floater. He has no idea. But my bet is that along the way, he watched someone do it, and he started doing it. So I think your players show you what they're good at and what they like doing. And being able to find those things and even having them tell you, do you like going left or right? And they may not know, but you can tell them, you're much better going right because you want them to go right. So, but for the most part, I think not only do they tell you, but they show you, and trying to be aware of that. Taking a concept that you like, okay, and fitting it into a current play. I mentioned wide pin downs. That's something that we really like for Boyan. What are we doing? What is the play that allows us to create the wide pin down? I mentioned taking a play and making it yours. Most of the plays, I don't know what percentage, but I think all of us, would agree that there's nothing wrong with taking someone else's play. The thing that gets me sometimes is when someone does something that you're doing too, and then they run it so much better than you, and you end up going back and seeing how you should run it. So, and then reusing an older play. You may have a team that all of a sudden is different, and a play kind of goes, in the drawer, and then your team changes, and it can come back. And then the last thing is, experimenting with new concepts. I'll show you a clip, but a good example of this is when we got Kyle Korver. He's just such a unique player that there wasn't stuff that we were doing, that took advantage of who he was. Whether that's an after timeout play, or in the course of the game, and everybody in our team, like those plays, guys would really execute because they knew if they got Kyle a shot, he was going to make it. And so go ahead. So this is one that we stole. Go ahead and stop. And everybody knows how hard it is to guard Steph. So this was an interesting little action, that we watched them do a lot where he's getting chased and he just comes up the inside. So we try to take that concept and fit it to our team. Go ahead. We wanted Royce to have a live dribble where Draymond had his dribble down. He's such a good passer, no disrespect to Royce. He ends up putting it down here. So Mike was handling the ball. We wanted to get into the play through pick and roll, but we wanted the concept, okay? Felt like Mike, is such a good shooter. Here they chased him on the play, and he just drives in the lane. Okay? This is an example of literally, seeing something and just making it yours. And I'm a big believer, a lot of things that we steal from Europe, the good thing is that I don't think, sometimes people don't realize this, that the time change is a huge deterrent to European coaches watching NBA games and NBA coaches watching European games because you're so vested in what you're doing. And, to be able, that for me, having a chance, even for a short period of time to be in Europe, I got to see so many things. And, everybody knows Spanoulis, great player. Would have been a great NBA player had he stayed in the NBA. He's obviously one of the greatest players to ever play in Europe. And this was the play that Olympiacos used to run for him. And it was hard to guard. He'd just get that tight handoff, okay, and take that shot. So we wanted to run it, and we got into it a little differently. Go ahead. We give Rudy the ball, and we started running it for Joe Johnson. Different than Spanoulis, but had that level of strength. Okay, so there's the concept again. Again, taking that concept and putting it, if you have a concept that you really like for a player, look at different ways to find the concept. So in this case, go ahead. We're rolling Gordon down at a pick and roll and bringing him up that way. Just getting into it with an initial pick and roll instead of getting into it from the corner. Okay? This is an example of an older play. Joe Johnson against the switch on the post, really hard to guard and really simple. They're switching pick and roll. We want to roll them down and throw him the ball and let him play. And that was one you could figure out pretty quickly by watching film of Joe throughout the course of the year, that he's pretty good on the post, on that block, going back to the middle to his right hand. So if you're putting him on the other block, you know, that's something I think we got to know. You know, where is he going to be successful? Okay, this year, similar situation. We've got, you know, Boyan, who's good on the post, very similar on the down block. And taking a play that you used 3-4 years ago and bringing it back because now it fits your personnel. So adjusting what you're doing, looking back, adjusting what you're doing, a different team, adjusting what you're doing with a concept, okay, in, you know, a different situation. This was something, this is kind of a funny story. We call this place Spalding, and I'm pretty open about a lot of stuff because I know how good the coaches are in our league. And my dad was a baseball coach, and I talk with my hands. So sometimes our players have no idea what I'm trying to call. Sometimes I'm not even calling a play. I'm just trying to do something. But this was a play, you know, or a concept that we named. There was a player that was in a draft workout who did this, and one of the guys on our staff recognized it, and we went back and looked at it and was like, man, that was kind of weird. What's going on with that play? And started thinking maybe it's a good play for Kyle Korver. And we started running it for Kyle on a catch and shoot. And then Jordan Clarkson, you know, who hasn't seen a shot he doesn't like, we knew he was going to shoot the ball, so we brought it back for Jordan Clarkson. And this was a new idea that we got from a guy in a draft workout. So the best lob play I ever got was on a pizza box when I was at Missouri. I don't know if you know this, Emo's Pizza. Some guy wrote a lob play on the back of the pizza box. I was like, it's better than anything I got. And we only ran it once because it was a bad, Keon Doolin threw a bad pass. So in any event, here's the concept where he just spins back. You got a shooter that's being chased. So again, go back to the other slide, Steve, because I think that just the one right before this about those 5 things, and then we'll finish it up. So to me, when you're talking about like in set offense, you know, experimenting, whether it's in a practice situation, you find a player taking something another team runs, you know, reusing another play. To me, these are like really good ways to try to think about this. It sounds like when you say, you know, adjusting to fit your personnel, to me, that's really broad, you know? So whether it's pick and roll and you're recognizing hands and coverages and locations, I really think those things matter. And I think as you become even more aware of them, you know, they'll matter even more. In flow situations, like what do you believe in, you know, as a coach that you don't want to compromise, no matter who your personnel is? Like you just, like, I don't like that. That may be great for another team, and it probably works for that other team because that coach feels strongly and wants to play that way, you know? So, you know, not compromising on a core base level of how you want to play. And sometimes that's hard because your personnel is going to change, and trying to figure that out. I think that's why some players are maybe better in one place than they are in the other. You know, it's not one coach doing something well, another coach doing something not as well. There's just things that connect with different people. Taking a play and making it yours. That's pretty obvious. I think we all do that. And then understanding, you know, bringing stuff back that you're comfortable with. You know, if you've run it and you've taught it, you know, if you've run it a while, you're probably going to be pretty good teaching it. You know, and that to me is the key when you borrow something from someone else. Make it yours, that you really believe in it, and you know how to teach it instead of saying, no, that play didn't work. No, it's not that simple. Okay, go ahead and go back to the last thing. Okay, Good? All right. I tried to be on time. I know questions are always hard in these situations, so I can wrap it up, or if there is a question. I know everybody's got places to go, but I'm happy to talk some more. Usually you're tired of me talking at this point, so. Thanks, John. Thanks, Albert. Okay, everybody, appreciate it. Thank you, guys. All right,
Yep. You know, this is interesting. They always talk about coaches' fraternity. You know, there's no closer group than coaches, right? And I thought it was very interesting that as Quinn was speaking, I happened to be sitting next to Nate, and he goes, John, I think I'm going to step out. Because out of respect for Quinn, I think I'm going to step out. Coaches' fraternity, right? But make no mistake, coaches are still competitive because he left Chris Gent, his assistant coach here. And I think I heard him say, Chris, take good notes because we got to beat this guy. So overall, great morning, you know. Be fun to get back here next year. Hopefully the pandemic is even better. We can get our international coaches back in the group where they're such a large part of this. And but I say, you know, great job, Sean. Great job, Jenny. Great job, Quinn. Great morning. Thanks.